the Director of Organizing at Legal Aid Justice Center. I will be the MC for today. And I want to remind everybody this is being recorded. We have simultaneous interpretation in 3 channels in English, French, and Spanish. And the thing you do is you press the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen and choose your preferred language. I will be putting those reminders in the chat at the beginning of each panel. But to get us started with the panels, I will walk us through what to expect for the day because we have some awesome topics up ahead. Starting in 5 minutes, we will have Ariel Garayar moderating a panel on Virginia and the federal landscape of immigration with an overview of the pathway to citizenship from Immigration Hub. Meredith Owen from Church World Services and Diana Konate of African Communities together. We will have that from 9:10 to 10:40. At 10:40, we'll take a 10-minute break. And at 10:50, we will have a panel on abolishing immigration detention in Virginia and beyond, moderated by Simon Sandoval Moshenberg, Legal Director of the Immigrant Advocacy Program at Legal Aid Justice Center, Didier Mbaliboto, former detainee at Farmville Detention Center, Asade Shashahani, Legal Advocacy Director at Project South in Georgia, Fred Sau, Senior Policy Counsel at Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and our own Flor Lopez Trejo, who's community organizer with Legal Aid Justice Center and is also a member of Freedom All Virginia Coalition. At 11:50, we'll take a 10-minute break, and our last topic of the day will be on race, ethnicity, and criminal justice with panelist Steve Discano of Fairfax County, moderated by Stephanie Niedringhaus of Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, Steve Discano of Fairfax County Commonwealth Attorney, Reverend Jamar Boyd II, Justice Reform Organizer at Virginia Interfaith Center, and Diane Berkeley Alejandro, lead advocate at ACLU People Power Fairfax. To round all of that up, we will have a closing of the summit and call to action with Maria Chavalan Sut, who is a sanctuary leader and leader of the Hands of Maria campaign. I think we are nearing the 9:10, so I think that's all. I will do a reminder for those who have been coming in while I was speaking that, again, we do have 3 channels for interpreting. One is English, one is French, one is in Spanish. The way you join the channel for your preferred language is by pressing on the globe button at the bottom and choosing your preferred language. You will join a line that is offering interpretation in that language. So with that, Ariel, do you have your panelists?
I have some of them and I'm looking for the rest. So
okay.
Give me a moment. I know there's a lot of people here. Give me a few moments.
Okay. Hi, everyone. For those who are just joining, we are getting started with the first panel, which is on Virginia and the federal landscape of immigration. We just need a couple more minutes. If you are, I just want to remind for any new folks to please go to the globe at the bottom of the screen in your Zoom screen and select your preferred language for interpretation. Thank you.
We'll get started in 1 minute. Sorry. We're waiting for one more speaker.
Es okay, Ariel. Para los que sean nuevos que necesiten en español, abajo tienen opciones
for people who are new.
que para presionar el globo en donde pueden elegir español para si necesitan español.
Hi, Luis. This is interpreter. Can you hear me? Yeah, if you're fully bilingual, you don't need to turn on the interpretation. So you can just turn it off. Mm-hmm.
All right. Hi, all. My name is Ariel. I am with the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Welcome to day 2 of the summit. I know, federal immigration is very much a hot topic. I know it's been in the news and there's been a lot of energy this year. Today, we'll be speaking about Virginia and the federal landscape of immigration. This past year, we've had, like I said, we've had a lot of renewed energy on so many levels, from advocates to organizations, uniting to make sure that we are able to reverse anti-immigrant policies while simultaneously making sure that we replace them and also put forth new policies that actually help our communities. Around the country, we have over 11 million undocumented immigrants. And we know we all are here because we know immigration is good for our communities and for our country. Federal immigration policy really hits close to home, even though it's made in Washington, D.C. All the laws from Congress and from the administration, the White House, are really impact us on a day-to-day basis, our families, our friends. We saw under the Trump administration, there was a lot of dog whistles and nativism policies put forth, and they even utilized the pandemic to put forth policies like the Remain in Mexico program that would really harm our system for asylum seekers. Putting forth immigration policies isn't just about legalization or pathway to citizenship, even though that will be part of our conversation. It's also making sure that people regardless of status, have access to labor rights and civil rights and are able to use government services that are there for us when we have the hardest of times. Especially, we've seen the pandemic that some of immigrants faced issues like getting access to food, rent relief, unemployment because of their status, but yet are still contributing to our economy. With this being said, we're gonna get started with our panelists. We will be taking questions at the end. So if you want, you can put your questions in the chat box, but we will have time at the end to dive deep into them. And but I did want to reintroduce our panelists that are with us. Right now we have Carrie Tablet, the Deputy Director of the Immigration Hub. She works with nonprofit organizations in Congress on policy and legislative advocacy to promote fair treatment of immigrants and refugees. She previously was a partner at the Vank Group, where she assisted nonprofit organizations and businesses, including the National Immigration Law Center, Deloitte, Human Rights First, and the Women's Refugee Commission with immigration policy advocacy. She previously served as the chief counsel for Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey for the past 5 years. And she staffed the senator with a gang of 8 and assisted in writing the comprehensive immigration reform bill, which passed the Senate in 2013. Carrie previously worked with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Rights Working Group, Break the Chain Campaign, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, and Physicians for Human Rights. And she graduated from Harvard Law School and Tufts University. Meredith Owen is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Church World Services for the Immigration and Refugee Program, where she advocates for immigrants and refugees in the U.S. and abroad. She has previous experience as a policy associate for the Alliance to End Slavery and Trafficking and Human Rights USA. She is barred, she's a lawyer, so she's barred in Maryland and the District of Columbia in DC. Diana is the policy director with African Communities Together, DC office. She's previously worked in the House of Representatives as a legislative assistant and scheduler. She has also served as the president of the Congressional African Staff Association, where she strove to educate Capitol Hill on African policy issues. She received her JD from Michigan State University College of Law and a political science degree from Old Dominion University, which is in Virginia. And last but not least, we have Christian Martinez, who is an advocacy specialist with CASA Virginia. He manages the political portfolio at the local, state, and federal levels with a policy priority to uplift immigrant communities. He represents CASA Virginia in various coalition calls and meetings with county supervisors, commercial offices, and so much more. He is a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University. All right, I guess we will get started with the actual questions, but yeah, so I'm gonna get started. Give me one moment. All right, I'm gonna get started with our speakers. I'm gonna go with the first question for Carrie. Obviously, we're gonna talk about the big elephant in the room, which is a pathway to citizenship and what's happening in Congress, because I know that's probably on everybody's mind right now. From the past, we have a new administration. It's been less than a year, but we have 3 more to go, basically. Carrie, can you give us an overview of what has happened in Congress, the new administration this past year, including where we are when it comes to getting a pathway to citizenship?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just give an overview of sort of how we got here on the legislative front and sort of where we're headed. You know, early on, we realized that Republicans were not going to come to the table on a path to citizenship. You know, they were meeting with Democrats, but it really wasn't going anywhere. The conversations just weren't actually producing any kind of agreements. And it became clear that Biden was going to use this budget reconciliation process to try to get things done, basically on climate and on care for, you know, children and the elderly and medical care issues. And, you know, a lot of folks within We Are Home, the big sort of national coalition, decided to pursue immigration on reconciliation. Honestly, from the very outset, we were kind of a challenging addition to this process. You know, normally they use budget reconciliation for tax issues, and they've used it for benefits, like public benefits issues on immigration, but they've never before used it for citizenship. And so, you know, budget reconciliation is a really very detailed and kind of challenging process legislatively. It allows you to pass things with just 50 votes, but there are lots of rules that go along with it in terms of basically needing to have your primary impact be related to the budget. So there's this thing called the Byrd Rule. It's after Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia, who was not Mr. Progressive. He was more of he had some questionable history, I would say. And he had this Byrd Rule because he wanted to limit what people could do with this process. Because, you know, as you know, in the Senate, you need 60 votes usually to do stuff. And so it's a really big deal that in this process, you only need 50 votes, which means, you know, like in our situation where the Democrats just have 50, that it's a really, really big deal to be able to pass what they want to pass just with that 50 votes. And so that's why there's all these like super strict rules about what you can do with this budget process, budget reconciliation. So the Byrd Rule, as I was mentioning, was meant to constrain the budget process. And it basically says that your policy impacts and your budget impacts in terms of the relationship, the budget impact has to be way more important. So the policy impact's not supposed to be as important. So folks within We Are Home decided to first try a big citizenship proposal, which was the House passed bills. So it was like Dream and Promise and the Essential Workers Bill, which actually didn't pass the House, but was introduced. The farm workforce part of that bill passed the House. So the Democrats decided to go into the parliamentarian who decides whether stuff violates the Byrd Rule or not, and ask her if that citizenship proposal would work. She wrote a fairly nasty response. It was quite a bit worse than we thought. And she basically said that she thought citizenship was just too much for budget reconciliation, that like the policy impact of giving people green cards was so big in terms of their life and their ability to live here and benefits and everything that it was just too much in her view to do it under budget reconciliation. It violated the Byrd Rule in her mind because of the huge policy impact compared to the budget impact. So then folks decided to still go back to her with registry, which we weren't sure how it would go. We were skeptical, at least I was skeptical just because she had said no to citizenship before, but folks in We Are Home decided to go ahead and try registry with her because it's such a simple fix. You know, it's this provision that's been in the law for 100 years and like you only have to change the date. And so we were like, well, maybe she'll go for it just because it's like such a simple fix that maybe the parliamentarian would do it. So the Democrats went back to the parliamentarian and they asked, you know, can we do this registry fix? And registry would like let people get a green card if you were here from a certain date. So the date was 2010. If you were here before 2010, you were gonna get a green card as long as you had good moral character. So the parliamentarian was approached about registry. She didn't write as nasty a note about that one, but she still said no. And she said that it was still a citizenship proposal and she wasn't gonna do it. And in the conversation the Democrats had with her, she was similarly very clear that she opposes green cards basically in the reconciliation process. She did mention that she might be interested in parole, which is a temporary process. It's a temporary program. It exists currently in the law. People get paroled into the US. Some people under that provision are able to adjust status. Like if you entered without inspection and you've got an immediate relative here, you can sometimes get a green card through parole. But mostly parole is for like having a work permit, being able to ask for advanced parole to travel, and not being deported. And also benefits. It allows you to get ACA benefits. But clearly it's not as good as a green card, right? Everyone knows that. Everyone wants everyone to get green cards. There's no disagreement about that. That's like the most important goal. Unfortunately, though, the parliamentarian wasn't on board. So after they talked to her about registry, the Democrats just sort of stopped talking to her for a while. They decided to just go ahead in the House, and they were planning to do registry in the House. Speaker Pelosi told some of the community groups in California that she'd be willing to do citizenship in the House bill. Pretty much all the national groups, and well, at least the Hub and most other national groups said, cool, like if you want to do registry, that's awesome, you should do it. The problem though came last weekend when the moderates in the House said that they would not vote for it. So Speaker Pelosi reached out and basically said, I don't have the votes for registry and like you're in danger of falling out of this package. So a number of groups switched to supporting parole in the package. And then a lot of other groups still were pushing for registry in the package because they want to do, folks want to do a disregard the parliamentarian, which I'll talk about in a second. So at the end of the day, they tried to do registry, it didn't work. The moderates were very unhappy about it because it had already been ruled out by the parliamentarians. So they felt like they were taking a tough political vote. Spanberger and Loria and some folks in Virginia were part of that problem, frankly. And they asked to do, I think they wanted to take it out, frankly, but they ended up agreeing to do the parole provision. There was a lot of discussion about limiting public benefits for parole, but some groups were able to push back on that and get them to keep the benefits in the package, like access to healthcare. So right now, the House bill has that parole provision. It does not have it doesn't have a registry provision. And it wasn't voted on because the moderates said that they wanted to have the CBO score, which is the Congressional Budget Office score, before they vote on it. So they're gonna vote on it hopefully next week, although they won't have the score, the cost of the bill by then either. So we're not sure if moderates like Spanberger or others will be willing to vote for it, but it would be great if folks are willing to push for that House bill to pass. There are still groups pushing for registry to be added back into the House bill. So that's also something some groups are pushing for. And then in terms of the Senate, they will take it to the Senate after it goes through the House. So if they succeed in getting it through the House by Thanksgiving, then they'll be in the Senate like in early December. And they will have this whole process, which is called vote-a-rama, where they have like a bazillion amendments and they stay up all night and they vote on amendments. And there'll be like a lot of anti-immigrant amendments. We don't know yet what the Senate will do in terms of the Senate's going to do like what they call a substitute amendment, you know, like it'll be like a replacement for some of the provisions. I think it's possible they may add registry or something similar, like DREAM related, back into the bill. They haven't said yet. because groups want to do a disregard strategy. I think it's possible they may add registry with parole. I'm not sure yet. It depends what the parliamentarian ultimately says about parole. At some point, the Dems are going to go back and talk to her about it in the next couple of weeks. So we don't know yet what's going to happen in the Senate, but just to briefly talk about the disregard strategy that a lot of groups are pushing. The idea behind that is that the parliamentarian is, it's like an undemocratic process, first of all, that this like one woman is deciding all these things. It's ridiculous. And then, part of it would be like, if there was a citizenship proposal in the Senate bill and the Republicans said, whoa, you're not allowed to do that, it violates the Byrd rule, then the Democrats could vote on it, and they would only have to have 40 votes to say, forget it, ignore the parliamentarian or disregard her, we're going to go ahead and keep it in. So we think we could win that vote of that initial vote of keeping it in. The only challenge is that after that, we think everyone would a lot of folks would probably freak out, and the Republicans would start attacking the bill with other votes that are at 50 vote requirement instead of 40. And so we think ultimately, at least I think, that it ultimately would be taken out, because I don't believe Joe Manchin is gonna stay with us through all those votes. But some people think that we should keep pushing for it, and that ultimately maybe Joe Manchin would agree to do it. So there's a big push on like Manchin and others to agree to do this disregard the parliamentarian strategy, and to ultimately try to get him to vote to stick citizenship in, even though it violates the rules of the Senate. Unfortunately, he's like a big stickler for the rules of the Senate, so I think it's a little challenging, and I think everyone realizes that, but it's a matter of like where you want to put your emphasis, and obviously citizenship is super important, so a lot of groups are really pushing on that disregard the parliamentarian strategy. So I'd say that's where we are. I'm going to take a break. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's incredibly helpful lay of the land of what's going on right now, especially since, we have a lot of, there's been a lot of steps taken to get us where we are. I know last year, many organizations here, like in December, started meeting with their members of Congress, asking them, please think about including DACA, TPS, essential workers, and farm workers into the reconciliation bill, because we knew it was coming, and we knew there was going to be multiple rounds of reconciliation coming up, because they did pass one reconciliation bill a few months after, but now this is the second round. So I know that it's taken a lot of conversations, legwork, organizing from a lot of organizations across the country. I did want to, make sure that we did talk about the part to unite people for the long-term mission, just because, we do have areas of opportunity to make sure that we do get something passed for the community. I guess with the uncertainty with the next steps of the Senate parliamentarian and the House right now, what opportunities do you think there are? Do you think there are to make sure that we do get something passed for the community, whether it's through reconciliation or through normal order again, to make sure that we stand together and are able to unite people for the long-term mission of, pathway to citizenship or legalization? And I'll let Diane, I know she's also been right there with us, making sure we get this through too.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. So, I mean, as far as, what opportunities we have, as Carrie mentioned, the disregard strategy to get green cards put back into the reconciliation bill. For us, we are one of the groups in the camp of feeling as though, that is still a viable option. You know, we feel as though our members have been fighting for years for this path to citizenship, for permanent protections. And we're finally at a place where, you know, with the Democrats controlling the House, the Senate, even though the margins are very small, you know, with the Democrats controlling Congress and controlling the White House, that this is our opportunity to do it. And, you know, we feel as though it will be hard. I mean, as Carrie laid out, the parliamentarian has not been on our side with including green cards in reconciliation. But we do think that that there is a shot at disregarding her advice, because, you know, she is a Senate staffer who gives advice to senators, and they have the option to take it or not. There have been times in the past where they have chosen not to take the parliamentarian's advice, though it's been limited, it has happened. And so we think that if senators are committed to immigration, committed to giving permanent protections to their communities, that this is a viable strategy. So, you know, that's one of the ways that we think, one of the opportunities that we think is still available to us. You know, another way to get something passed, possibly through regular order, would be to get rid of the filibuster. I don't think the Senate is there yet, but I think compared to earlier this year, when there was talk of getting rid of the filibuster, I think some senators have kind of moved towards that direction. Not saying that it will happen, but I think that you know, it could. So anyways, so yeah, so I do think that there are opportunities. I think that it will be very hard, extremely hard, but we've come this far. And so we really believe that we just really have to go all the way with it. So yeah, so I would say that as far as continued opportunities, I think that there is an opportunity for green cards.
Thanks for your insight. Yeah, no, I think it's going to be interesting to see where we end up in December. There's definitely a lot of, moving pieces with Congress and the different pieces of legislation that they're trying to put forth in parts in the reconciliation bill. Another part I did want to also ask you about is, right now there's a visa backlog, and I know Congress is trying to address it, but it's, our visa system isn't really working right now. It's not working fast enough for everybody, even though there's a lot of people applying for it. I know one part, many families are waiting to be reunited with loved ones and, have been waiting a long time for it. What actions do you think that can be taken to help unite families in Congress, especially now that there's an opportunity to actually get something through?
Sure. So another part of the, another provision in reconciliation, which has made it through the first version of the bill that passed markup in the House, and that is currently in the Build Back Better Act, is around backlogs. So family-based, employment-based backlogs, as well as diversity visas. So it's estimated that there are about 5 million people currently in the backlogs. So 4 million in family based visa backlogs and 1 million in employment-based backlogs. There are also several thousands of individuals who won the diversity visa lottery, but were not able to travel to the US because of the various immigration bans that Trump put in place and COVID processing delays. So one of the things that, one of the provisions in the current bill would be to make sure that the visas that go unused every year get rolled over to the next year, essentially. And this would, how the system works now is that there is a set number of visas that are available every year in the various categories. And, you know, once the time is up, the time is up. And a lot of the times, a lot of those visas are lost. They don't use all of those visas. And so the provision in the Build Back Better Act would allow us to roll that over to the next year and still have those visas available to help to address the backlogs. There's also a provision that makes available diversity visas for individuals who have, you know, won the lottery, were either able to get their visas and not travel, or were not able to complete the process to actually get the visas. It would let them continue on and, you know, hopefully get that once in a lifetime chance in the US. So my organization, African Communities Together, is supportive of those provisions. We have been working with the Value Our Families Coalition. They've been the lead in pushing those provisions and ensuring that they're kept in the bill. But we're very supportive of them, and you know, and are working with members of Congress to ensure that they're kept in the bill, because you know, this is one way that we can start chipping away at backlogs and make sure that families who have been waiting for years, sometimes decades, are able to reunite with their families here in the US.
Thank you for that insight. And yeah, like, you know, I know reconciliation is getting a lot of things added to it on immigration isn't just about a pathway to citizenship. There's a lot of, our immigration system is incredibly complex. And, you know, I think definitely we need to make sure that we're able to get people processed and through so they can actually be reunited. So thank you for that insight. I'm going to jump over to Meredith, who is with Church World Services. You know, right now they're doing a lot of work on Evacuate Our Allies, which is with the Afghan refugee program. And I did want to give her time because, let's be honest, the refugee program was also under attack the past year. And it, like, you know, in the Trump administration, they really didn't want to process a lot of people to be able to resettle in the United States. You know, Meredith, I wanted to see what challenges have you seen in the past few months when it comes to rebuilding the refugee programs, and also what opportunities there are for the future of the program as well.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I wanted to share just a few things. You know, one is this administration has been incredibly slow in its rebuild of the refugee protection systems that we have. The previous administration had decimated it by more than 80%, and so we always knew that it was going to take a while to rebuild. And I remember last year just sort of like head in my hands thinking it's going to take the rest of our lives to like fully rebuild and strengthen the program to where we wanted it to be at this point, given that the program is more than 40 years old. So the Biden administration had been so slow to even just restore the part of the resettlement program that builds its pipeline. So historically, the resettlement program resettles refugees based on vulnerability. We accept the largest number of referrals from UNHCR. And the Trump administration had ended both of those things. They stopped resettling based on vulnerability. Obviously, there was a series of refugee bans, but they also stopped accepting UNHCR referrals. And President Biden had initially planned to increase the FY 2021 refugee admissions goal right after consulting with Congress in like February of 2021. But weeks turned into months, and we didn't even get an increase to the admissions goal until May, when he increased it to 62,500. And that was literally only because the advocacy community was outraged when we heard that Biden was going to keep it at the historic low 15,000. So exciting that advocacy works again, but really not exciting that it requires that much advocacy just to increase the target number for how many refugees we want to resettle. And given that we resettled in actual arrival numbers, the lowest number in the history of the program in FY 21 with 11,411 refugees being arrived, that doesn't set us up for success in fiscal 2022. And so the biggest message that we are pushing on the Biden administration is that they need to be partners with us in rebuilding the program. We need them to invest resources into rebuilding both the overseas and the domestic infrastructure that was decimated during the last administration. So we need sites, staffing. We need to, you can't just like snap your fingers and have a new building built and staff onboarded. That's a process. We need improvements to the program that address significant backlog issues. We have had, the resettlement program has family reunification components to it. And there have been huge backlogs that have ground processing for those cases to a halt for several years. And that backlog has only worsened in light of COVID. And so we need the administration to do both of those things: invest in the overseas and domestic infrastructure and make the policy improvements to strengthen the program and address the backlog. And as we move forward, we have previously asked the administration to increase the admissions goal to 200,000. But more importantly, we need to make sure that the future starts and stops to the program don't happen anymore, because that is the thing that has a cascading effect, where once you stop the program, all of the security checks get thrown off, and it takes even more resources to process people to the United States. And so something like the GRACE Act, which is a bill that's been introduced in Congress the last two Congresses, would set a minimum refugee admissions goal of 125,000. That's not, a complete solution, but it is one thing that would force the administration to not be able to set an admissions goal lower than that if it were enacted. And it would be step one in a multi-step process to prevent the resettlement program from being decimated in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of rebuilding and that has to be done, but also, yeah, this year I know, even to increase the cap for, a lot of groups did unite, faith groups, labor groups, agencies that had traditionally partnered with the federal government to make this happen really had to put a lot of work into that. A lot of letters, a lot of meetings, a lot of calls, just to even get that proposal uplifted.
And that's on top of the fact that we're resettling Afghan arrivals with our like decimated program. Like we're throwing down to welcome record numbers of arrivals. And we want to, and we'll continue to do it. It is the right thing to do. We're pushing for the administration to do more and bring more, process more Afghans to the US. But we can do both of these things at the same time. We can resettle record numbers of folks experiencing a massive humanitarian crisis, and we can rebuild the program.
Yeah. And I know that, like, especially with the Afghan resettlement, Virginia really had to take a major role in that, considering that a lot of the military bases that they were sending people to were stationed in Virginia. So a lot of nonprofits like Church World Services really had to act quick. But thank you so much, Meredith. And like I said, like, getting to that part and to be able to actually make changes, really, it takes a lot of people power. People power is incredibly important. And, yeah, there's a lot of organizations out there, but, legislators really listen to the people, and they do take the time to track the calls, track the letters being sent, and to know where people like priorities are. A lot of families, especially this year, have begun to get involved to make sure that we are getting some of these priorities for the immigrant community passed this year. And we have organizations such as labor unions, faith groups, immigrant rights groups, we've had a lot of multi-ethnic, multi-racial groups unite this year. And even in the past, let's be honest, when we were under attack with the Trump administration, a lot of people wanted to make sure that we were able to disseminate the racist rhetoric that was coming from the White House and also, wave a red flag of the anti-immigrant policies that were being put forth. I did want to hand it over to Christian with CASA. CASA in Virginia has been a major mobilizing force and has really united with a lot of partner groups this year, especially with the We Are Home campaign. I wanted to see how, we've been able to unite people to get involved within the legislative process, especially since, some people, we have advocates that have been around for many years, but we also have many people who are, trying to figure out the process, trying to figure out what works and how they can also uplift their voices too.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well. But yeah, this topic is a very important topic. This isn't just something that impacts Latinos, immigrants. This is a topic that is important to everyone. CASA has played a significant role in making sure citizenship continues to stay on the conversation at the top of the table. From our citizenship march back in September 21st this year, we've made so much noise as Congress is coming in back in session, and know how important it is just to make sure we get citizenship and just guarantee that pathway to citizenship to Americans. CASA has been on the ground in DC while also communicating with lawmakers, ensuring that it does get done. Bird dogging has been a strategy we have been doing, getting lawmakers to commit to ensuring that citizenship is on BBB when it comes to law. Messaging and organizing has been critical factors in keeping this conversation in the front seat, working with other immigrant advocacy organizations has made this messaging work even more. Social media, sharing family stories, and showing what is on the ground continues to give people hope. People are worried due to what the parliamentarian has done with going against plans A and B. The goal is to keep fighting until we get this done. If an issue is critical to you, you will find a way to get involved because of how big of an impact it has on you, your family, and loved ones that are being impacted by it. CASA is working very hard and continuing to organize and get people involved in the legislative process. As an organization advocating for these communities, we see this as an opportunity to bring everyone together and work together to get what we all want in the end, and that is citizenship. Joining an immigrant advocacy organization and or following them on social media will allow families to be informed and also know when actions are taking place. We want to make sure anyone who is interested in getting involved in the process is given the information for them to do that. And we know not everyone can go to DC and participate in these actions. So there's other ways that you can get involved, like communicating with your lawmakers, knowing who is in the federal level that is representing you. You go directly to them and just sending them an email, calling their office. There's so many ways that you can be active and be part of the cause and just getting what we all want in the end, and that's citizenship. But there's a lot of ways that people are getting involved and just continuing that momentum until it's all done in the end. Thank you.
No, thank you. Yeah. And citizenship is one of the, the We Are Home campaign and Pathway to Citizenship are one of the major efforts that we've been pushing, especially this year. But I know Diana also mentioned the Value Our Families campaign. I know there's Defund Hate, which talks about defunding our enforcement programs and, looks at the budgetary process of everything. So, there's a lot of campaigns out there. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved and to find advocates that really are specializing in some of these spaces, because immigration is huge. There's a lot of moving parts to it, detention, enforcement, I can go on, but with that being said, I know that everybody has their eyes on Congress, and I know we've been talking about legalization and visa backlogs as a part of, solving these problems. But I did want to give opportunity, just because, the immigration system is huge, to see what our panelists think about where Congress can actually transform the immigration system into one that actually supports our families. I know that's super vague, it's super general, but there's a lot of root issues that are with immigration that that we need to solve, but also process issues as well. And yeah, I'll hand this off to Diana to go first, and I'll let our speakers join in.
Sure. I think that one of the ways that Congress can, transform our immigration system would be possibly working on, issues around future flows and how, how people can come into the U.S. Right now, we have a family-based immigration system, and that definitely needs to be kept in place because one of our values is family. I think it should remain. It should definitely remain that. But I think that there are other ways to also provide an avenue for others to come in who may not have family here in the US and under our current system, may not have ways to immigrate to the US. One of the programs that has been very beneficial for African immigrants in particular has been the diversity visa program. So, we would really like to see that program strengthened. Currently there are 55,000 diversity visas that go out every year. A large percentage of them are given to individuals from African countries, but we would like to see that number increased. Earlier in the year, when President Biden introduced his bill that would have given citizenship to the 11 million, there was a component in there that would have increased diversity visas to 80,000. We think that that's a good start, but definitely creating additional pathways for individuals to come to the US is definitely a way that, that Congress can improve our immigration system.
Awesome, thanks. I'll hand it off to Meredith as well, because I know she touched upon some of the stuff for Congress too.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a guest. Okay, so I think that there are a few things that are coming down the pike. I mean, actually, what I want to talk about right here is Afghanistan refugee specific, because we're in the middle of Evacuate Our Allies advocacy days this week. And the most immediate asks that we're pushing Congress to do is to pass an Afghan Adjustment Act so that Afghans who've arrived by and large with humanitarian parole have a pathway to apply to become lawful permanent residents 1 year after arrival. And there is, we need it to be bipartisan because we are expecting it to not be part of budget reconciliation. And we would like it to be part of an FY22 omnibus package, or if there's another CR or whatever is must pass that's coming up. And I'm going to put into the chat function the action alert that's accompanying advocacy days. This is really important because Afghans who are arriving with parole are being otherwise dumped into the asylum backlog. We've talked a lot on this panel already around USCIS delays and backlogs, and there aren't, what does it mean to evacuate people to the US and then force them to remain in temporary status and in limbo for years? It's also really inefficient for the administration to put them into the asylum backlog, particularly when by and large, the arrivals fit within the definition of a refugee, given that they were fleeing violence and persecution. So passing an Afghan Adjustment Act is one big thing. The second big thing is holding the administration accountable for continuing to create safe pathways out of Afghanistan and processing to the US. We have continued to push them and have gotten insufficient answers around what their plan is to continue processing Afghans to the US who are still overseas, both in Afghanistan as well as in other host countries. And we know that there will be another caseload of Afghans brought to the lily pads or the military bases overseas for processing to the US, but we haven't gotten a sense of exactly how many. We've heard everything from 10,000 to 30,000, but there are hundreds of thousands of Afghans who are in need of protection, and we need to be doing everything that we can to make sure that we are upholding our moral and legal obligations to these folks. We also know that a lot of individuals have been filing humanitarian parole applications, and so the administration has barely processed any of them. There was an article that came out yesterday that was speaking to the 20,000 humanitarian parole applications for Afghan nationals that have been submitted, and only 93 have been processed. And that's for Afghans who are outside of Afghanistan. So we need the administration to waive application fees, at least for humanitarian parole applications, particularly given that they're not really processing them. We need a categorical parole program for Afghan nationals, at least for those who have U.S. ties or loved ones in the U.S. And we want to hold the administration accountable for more broadly expediting and expanding and rebuilding the resettlement program and refugee protections. And that, I think, we're going to be, well, I would have loved to say that this fight would have been, done. We're good to go by the end of this calendar year, but I think that this is going to carry us into the beginning of the next calendar year. And we'll also be pushing for additional funding from Congress to fund the refugee admissions program, both the overseas and the domestic pieces. The last thing, I would be remiss if I didn't mention state and local, because states and localities have been instrumental in providing supplemental funds for the resettlement infrastructure for Afghan arrivals, for others, for making it easier for refugees to take the driver's test in their languages of origin. And there are a lot of different creative ways that states and localities can be involved. And, in light of how the election went, now is a really good time to talk with the governor's office, the Office of New Americans, state legislators. Kathy Tran has been a huge supporter to see what we can do to have welcoming policies at the state and local level.
No, thank you so much. No, that's incredibly helpful. And yeah, like definitely state and local have had to step up a lot in places where our federal government haven't been able to help us, help a lot of communities. But it's definitely, thank you so much for that insight. I know you have to drop off in a few minutes for an Evacuate Our Allies Advocacy Day. So anybody who wants to get involved, make sure you check in the chat for the link that Meredith had sent. And thank you so much, Meredith, for being with us. Yeah. And I'll hand it off to Carrie as well, who I know she tracks everything on a day-to-day basis on what's happening in Congress and the different bills that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think reconciliation is kind of the major thing we can do this year. I think next year we'll probably focus a lot on appropriations. And I know you all have been involved with Defund Hate. I think appropriations is always a place where you can really make a lot of difference, just because there's so much language in there about how ICE should act or how CBP should act. And I'm hopeful that at some point we can do more there. I mean, one challenge though is that the Republicans are not going to want to be helpful. And so they may just keep doing like continuing resolutions, which just means they like continue the same funding level. So, I mean, that's certainly a challenge, but I think it's still important to keep an eye on appropriations for sure. I think honestly though, like there's a lot more that can be done on the administrative front. I really want to spend next year focused on TPS primarily and getting the administration to do more grants of TPS. They obviously could really help a lot of people who are from Central America by doing grants of TPS to Central America. And I would really urge Virginia groups to get involved, as soon as possible in pushing for expansion of temporary protected status grants. The administration's done a few grants so far, but they could definitely do a lot more and protect a lot more people. And TPS is really helpful because it doesn't have the same litigation challenges that if the administration could go out and do parole administratively for people, but the problem is then they just get sued in 5 seconds and it would get shut down by some crazy judge in Texas. Whereas with TPS, it has a lot more protection from litigation. So that's helpful. So that's going to be my big focus next year. Our organization will also focus obviously extensively on border and asylum issues, as we definitely haven't made as much progress as we all would like on those areas. Title 42, the restrictions on entry are still in place. I'm hoping those will go away soon, maybe in the next month or two. We still have court battles about the MPP program at the border, which, causes huge amount of suffering for asylum seekers. I think over the next few years, we really have to push for more humane processing at the border, getting rid of all the Trump policies at the border. They need to really think through like how the border is staffed more appropriately for the type of people who are coming, which are largely families who need, a lot of humanitarian assistance. So those are definitely some of the areas we'll be focused on next year for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that following the money in appropriations is really incredibly important because, where you spend money kind of shows also your values of where you want our government to go. And definitely like, there's a lot of areas of opportunity that we can take. I know the pathway to citizenship, the campaign for that has taken a lot of energy for a lot of groups. And I think that's like the number one ask that everybody has wanted, but also, there's other areas that we need to do reform in as well, like detention and enforcement as well. So thank you for that. And last but not least, I want to hand it off to Christian, who is with CASA.
All right. Well, reconciliation is definitely the best opportunity for Congress to transform the immigration system that's supportive of families. But just Congress giving immigrants an opportunity by living in a system that's supportive, continuing to find ways that will unite families and allow them to go through an immigration process together rather than being separated is something that is needed. And just it's causing a lot of issues that can negatively affect these families by what's happening now. And it's definitely needed for that to be fixed. We at CASA believe in family unity, and that will be one of the top priorities that would transform the immigration system in the right direction. Protecting these families and knowing that they are going to be reunited soon if they happen to be separated in the first place. Having a system that will welcome and recognize immigrants as essential members of society and turn away from the compounding harms of over-policing and incarceration will transform our system as well. And we know that a lot of policy changes can happen in the state and local level. So along with Congress, with reconciliation going on right now, there can be a lot of work done in the state and local level that have been done that can be supportive to immigrants, especially in Virginia with driver's license, in-state tuition to immigrants. There's so much work to continue to be done here.
Thank you. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of work to be done, but I'm very optimistic these next few months we're gonna take those steps to make sure that we're supporting families. And yeah, so I do want to also head over to the administration just because let's be honest, the administration does have a bit of power too to put forth regulations, to put forth certain rules. Obviously, the Biden administration inherited a lot of not so great policies. And, they've taken these past few months, they've taken some steps to repeal some of these anti-immigrant policies. Sometimes we celebrate them really quickly as a snapshot and then we just go back into the work. But sometimes, we need to look at them and review them and try to see how we can shape them into something that's a little bit more supportive as well. It's a step forward, but not the full outcome that we would love to see. What are some notable actions that have allowed the president and the agencies to exercise their authority to shape immigration law and policy this past year? This is for all panelists, so I'll let Carrie go first.
Okay, great. Yeah, the hub is actually working on a report about everything that they've done. It is actually quite a lot. They still have really a lot to do, especially on the border and asylum. But they have been on anti-Blackness, I would say too. I'm sure Diana will talk about issues there. It's been really rough with treatment of Haitian migrants and Title 42 and everything. I would say, they started off really strong with getting rid of the public charge rule, repealing the Muslim and African bans. They did DED, deferred enforced departure for Liberians. They did quite a lot sort of early on. They haven't really done, I don't think, quite as much as I think they will hopefully do in the future on like affirmative relief, which is, using their power to grant status to people. They've done a little bit on parole in place, parole administratively, but not as much as they can do, I think. They certainly can do more on Haiti, for sure. Not just in terms of treatment of migrants that I already mentioned, but also just in terms of like relief for Haitians, like parole. They have more to do, I would say, too, on addressing root causes. They're starting to look at like regional ways to address migration, but there's a lot more to be done there. They actually are at a summit right now, I think, with Mexico, where they're talking about more regional cooperation, but there's been a lot of kind of bad things that have happened in terms of their work with Mexico so far, just in terms of like enforcement in Mexico. And so there's a long way to go, I think, on having a more humanitarian approach. Definitely something to work on next year, I think. In terms of kids issues, they're working on still reuniting families. It has been a slow process. They have quite a bit of a ways to go in terms of still reuniting kids that were separated under Trump. There's been a really rough conversation too about the settlement negotiations for paying families that have been separated. That's gotten a lot of really negative attention with Republicans. But hopefully there will be a fair settlement. Most important, just making sure all the kids are back with their parents and that people are allowed to come into the US and live here. When there's been influxes of kids, it's obviously been incredibly challenging with not having totally appropriate facilities. So they need to definitely do more work on that area. They keep saying they need more money to have better facilities, which I think a lot of advocates say you should be transferring money from other pots. But that's definitely an area where they need to keep progressing. They've tried to do things on the enforcement front, like, they did a sensitive locations memo recently. You can't enforce in certain protected areas. They did a really good memo on worksite enforcement, like trying to protect workers who come forward with labor violation, trying to give them protection from deportation. But they've been stymied in the courts. When they first did their moratorium, that got shelved by the courts. And then they've also tried to do the enforcement parties, and that's also been a battle, although to some extent has moved forward. So there's still a lot to be done, I think, on enforcement, making sure that, with the new enforcement parties memo, that they're working with their local officers to make sure that they're doing what they can do to not enforce against people who, there's no reason to go after for deportation. And then they've still relied on 287G state and local agreements, which is definitely an area they could do more work. So I would, and just to finish up with asylum, as I already mentioned, like they've reversed a lot of Trump policies, but there's certainly a lot more to do in terms of getting rid of Title 42 and, making sure that they're treating people appropriately. So, and then there's continued litigation on the MPP program as well, and they need to be more aggressive about trying to end MPP. In terms of like DOJ, they have done some things, but they could do more, definitely in terms of access to counsel. There's actually access to counsel money that's in the reconciliation bill that I think would be helpful. So I think I'll stop there. It's a general view. I mean, I think, clearly border and asylum is sort of a top area, and then also trying to get relief for as many people as possible. Thank you.
No, thanks. I appreciate that, like, really big overview. And yeah, I'll also hand it off to Diana.
Sure. So I think that one of the things, well, I'll say one of the surprisingly good things that came out of the last administration around immigration was the Liberian Refugee Immigration Fairness Program, which is a green card, which is a program that gives green cards to Liberians who have been in the US since 2014. So that did pass into law under the Trump administration. But unfortunately, after it passed into law, we had a lot of problems with the implementation of that program. The policies around implementation of that program made it very difficult for people to actually, successfully go through the program. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of delay. And it was just very hard at that time under the previous administration to get, any kind of improvement to the implementation. One of the things that I think this administration has done well, but there's still room for improvement. They've really engaged with advocates around how to improve the implementation of that program. There have been several policy changes to the policy manual that we believe have helped, or helped to clarify what exactly USCIS is looking for when an individual applies for their adjustment of status. And so we've really been encouraged by the engagement of this administration and their willingness to improve the implementation of that program so that the largest number of Liberians can get their green cards under that program. But like I said, there still is a lot of, there's room for improvement. We estimated that there were possibly around 10,000 Liberians that could be eligible for the program. So far, over 3,000 people have applied for the program. Unfortunately, one of the bad, one of the areas where I think that USCIS could definitely improve is with processing those applications. Of the over 3,000, 70% remain pending. So a large percentage of people who have applied for the program still don't know whether, they don't know anything about where their application is, just that they're still in the process. And that's really concerning for us. We understand that there are extreme backlogs at USCIS, but this is a program with a certain window. It expires in December 20th of this year. So we really, call on the administration to really improve processing of these applications and prioritizing them so that folks who have been in the pipeline for close to 2 years now can finally get their green cards. But that's one of the areas that I would say we've been happy with what we've seen. but there's still a lot of room for improvement.
Thanks so much. Yeah. And I'll hand it over to Christian also to give his insights as well. And yeah, like there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of the programs that are being put in place.
No, yeah, there's so much more that can continue to be done. And President Biden has done a bit when it comes to repealing anti-immigrant policies that were in place from the previous administrations, from issuing executive orders involving immigration to also administrative policy changes that have helped these communities that have been progressing, going in the right direction. But like I said, there's still much more work to be done. On President Biden's first day, he signed a memorandum preserving and fortifying DACA, which directed DHS Secretary and Attorney General to take all actions necessary and consistent with applicable law to preserve and fortify the DACA program. CASA's priority is to continue to protect our DACA recipients and focus on getting that pathway to citizenship for them, because of how these recipients arrived in the US at such a young age and now are in their 20s. It's definitely needed. $5.6 billion is the amount that's contributed in taxes by the 643,560 current active DACA recipients, and with an additional 3.1 billion contributed in state and local taxes by Dreamers each year. Yeah, there's so much more work to be done, and hopefully the continuing of going in the right direction.
Thank you so much. I know we're about to run short on time, so I'm gonna jump into the Q&A section really quickly. You know, I'm gonna hand this over. When it comes to immigration, when it comes to administrative action on reining an ICE deportation machine, the Biden administration is acting like it has all the time in the world. Meanwhile, immigrants are being arrested, detained, deported every day. What is it going to take? What does our side have to do to them to act with the same level of speed, intense focus on immigration as the Trump administration did? This is a general question for anybody who wants to answer it on our panelists as well.
I mean, I would say that this is a really, really good question. It's sort of like the central question, right, for all of us. I mean, this administration has a little ways to go, I would say. I mean, they started off like super strong in terms of the deportation moratorium, and then, you know, they've tried to roll out fair parties, but it's just ICE is such a problematic agency, and there's just so much reform that needs to be done. It really does require like an extreme level of persistence and commitment. And I think it will, you know, just be something that we all have to push on them for years, and really just do as much work as we can public education wise and with the Hill, and just like constantly just keep at it. I mean, it is definitely sort of the main area that we have to really succeed in, is especially border enforcement, but interior enforcement as well. I mean, I do think with the American public that we're in a better position on interior enforcement over the last like 20 years or so. I think people have realized that, you know, immigrants are important parts of the community, and, you know, people shouldn't be deported if they have really strong ties. But, you know, ICE is just such a well-funded sort of gigantic agency that they just end up, you know, it just ends up causing a lot of problems. So I think there's just a lot to be done in terms of like the officers and the leadership in ICE, culture change, and honestly, eventually like changing the mission of the agency and trying to reform it is just really critically important. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know you're about to jump off, so but I appreciate you being here. Thank you.
If there's question and answer too, I can stay on.
Yeah. I have another question. Is the Biden administration interested in extending TPS administratively, or do you think Congress will do this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I was trying to look for it.
No, yeah, I know. I just lost it right now, actually. Oh, okay. Is the Biden administration interested in extending TPS administratively, or do you think Congress will do this?
Sure, I can make a few comments about that. I think that, as Carrie mentioned, the administration has designated a few countries for TPS, but there's still a lot that they can do to protect a lot of people in this country. In the beginning of the year, we joined several other organizations and sent a letter to the administration listing out, I think, close to 20 countries that we believed would warrant TPS designation. Only a small fraction of those countries have been designated so far. So that there's definitely something, there's definitely more that the administration can do to designate more countries and protect more people. And, we are currently, a lot of our organizations continue to push for those redesignations. We have not let up. And I think it's been a few months since any new countries have been designated. I don't know necessarily that it means that the administration is not interested, but I do think that we need to continue to push them. And as far as whether Congress will, extend TPS to countries, typically it's DHS that makes those TPS designations. There have been bills introduced in Congress to designate countries for TPS. One of the most recent ones was a bill that was introduced by Representative Lofgren from California that would designate Cameroon for TPS. But it's, that would be a super heavy lift to get that through the House and the Senate. The quickest route would be for the administration and DHS to designate these countries for TPS and protect folks who need that protection.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. And yeah, like I think there's a long list of, or like a lot of countries that really are vying for TPS. And I know hopefully we get them a lot sooner than later. I did get a direct message earlier on in the conversation I know a lot of people have been talking about Build Back Better and the difference between the bipartisan infrastructure framework. I know some people get those confused or think they're intertwined somehow. Someone did ask a clarification question. What immigration legislation was included in the transportation infrastructure bill? So I'm going to assume that's the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which passed this past weekend.
Yeah, the bipartisan bill passed last weekend, as you just said, and it included some money for port of entry infrastructure, but it didn't include any useful like immigration provisions in terms of relief for people. All those provisions are in the more progressive version, which is the Build Back Better bill, which is still in the House. And so we really need folks to push for passage of Build Back Better next week. And then it needs to go to the Senate and include the best possible immigration provisions. And we need to make sure we don't fall out of the bill. So please weigh in with your Virginia folks, especially Spanberger and Loria and those ladies about keeping immigration in the bill, do the best job you possibly can on immigration, pass the bill next week. And Diana can jump into if you want, thanks.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add, but I do think, would likewise encourage folks to reach out to their members, specifically the moderates in Virginia, specifically Spanberger, to really make sure that they're on board with the immigration provisions, you know, for us, that they're on board with including green cards specifically. But, you know, we really need BBB passed out of the House next week.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Sorry, I keep losing questions. I have one question for you. I know it was specifically when you were talking about the visa backlog, diversity visas. Actually, yeah, I know it was during that period. Could you please go into more detail about what exclusions are from the proposed parole package and other than the time of date, arrival, i.e. criminal carve-outs, etc.? Thank you.
So as far as exclusions from parole, I mean, so I can talk about, you know, areas where we have concerns. Of course, it's not permanent. So, well, okay, let's start with people who have been in the US after or before 2011 would be eligible. So that leaves out a large chunk of people. The protection that people would get, of course, is not permanent. People would have 5 years of protection, and they would be able to extend that once up to September 2031. So folks may not have a full 10 years of protection under that program. And, you know, as we've been talking about these backlogs at USCIS, there's a, you know, if parole was to pass this year and people were able to start putting their applications in, based on our experience with the LRIF program, the Liberian Green Card program, it's going to take a while for people to even get their applications reviewed and processed. So people will be sitting in queue essentially. And as it's written, it's not sure that even though people will have access to work permits, it's not clear that people will have access to those work permits as they wait during that time. That would have to be, that would need to come out through policy guidance. But going back to the question, sorry. People might be inadmissible and not qualify for parole if they have been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, if they have violated any US or foreign laws relating to controlled substances, if they have 2 or more convictions for crimes with sentences that add up to 5 years. A lot of these are currently in law that make folks inadmissible. So a lot of those same inadmissibilities would transfer over to parole. And I don't know if I think Carrie may have already dropped off.
Yes, she did. Yes, but no, thank you so much for that insight. It's incredibly helpful. And I have one last question before we wrap up. Maria Javon, I can never say her last name. She's a Native woman from this continent. You know, what effective and reliable protection programs do we have? Perhaps it's in some language that I have not learned yet. And what effective protection programs do we have for those of us who have taken refuge in the church and are terrified of the way that ICE has treated us so terrifyingly. ICE and their ISAP police. I do want to give some context. One, Maria, she is amazing. She is a indigenous Guatemalan woman who has come to the United States seeking asylum. And she was staying in at a Charlottesville church. Thank you, Maria, for joining us. I really do greatly appreciate you always being on the front lines and joining in on a lot of the actions that are being taken. She was one of the fasters for an action that Faith in Action had put forth. And I'm not sure, Diana, if you would feel comfortable answering this question. I do want to say that Maria, I know that we have your information and we're happy to pass it along to a lawyer that handles cases like yours more directly, just because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not sure if Christian's a lawyer, and Diana, I know you do more public policy aspect of this, but I did want to also make sure that we're closing that loop as well. Diana, I know that you have seen policy in the works as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have an answer to that, so I can't. I can't really answer that, but I can look into it and help to provide maybe some answers that the seer can share. But right now, I just don't know the answers.
No, thank you so much for that. Yeah, Maria, we will definitely get in contact with you and see if we can give you a response as well. This is the end of our Q&A portion. I know we're over time. I just want to give 1 minute to our speakers to say any last words. Yeah. I'll hand it.
Sure. So, thank you for having me here and for allowing me to participate in the panel discussion. I just want to, thank everyone for being engaged. I think that, as Christian mentioned, there have been so many people who have, who have become active. There are so many ways that people can become active to help to support us moving forward as it relates to immigration. And want to thank people for lending their voices to this movement, to helping to move the issues forward, and just encourage people to continue to be active. Because nothing happens without, folks at the ground level, at the grassroots level. People don't listen to advocates unless there are people behind them pushing for this. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll hand it off to you, Christian, to give the last minute closing.
All right. Well, first, I would like to say thank you for having me. It's definitely a pleasure talking in this panel and just talking about this important topic that's on everyone's minds right now. And just to continue finding ways to participate and be active in this process. We know this isn't something that one person can do. This is a whole team effort, and to just, if everyone gets involved and just communicate with their members, so much can be done by that, and one person can make a difference. So if everyone combines and joins together and just get involved, we can get this done and just continue to find ways, and we should be going in the right direction if we keep doing it.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know there is a lot of ground that we covered today. Please remember to get involved, get active, and thank you for joining us. There is a break right now, so please feel free to take time.
This panel, we are going to get started soon, and I just want to check with Diane if you need any more time before we get started. All right. Well, with that, I will hand it to actually, I will hand it to Stephanie Niedringhaus with Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, who's going to moderate our next panel, which is on race, ethnicity, and criminal justice. Just before we get started, I would just like to ask everyone to, of course, listen to this whole panel and then actually stick around right to the end when we're going to turn it over to Maria Chavalanzut, who will be closing the summit for us and closing with a call to action. Thank you so much. And with that, Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. It has been a very moving summit. I've learned a lot, and a lot of what we heard yesterday and then again today has been a wonderful preparation for this panel, which, as he said, is on race and ethnicity and criminal justice. We have three terrific panelists. The first one you'll hear from is Diane Alejandro, who is the lead advocate with ACLU People Power Fairfax. The second one you'll hear from is Reverend Jamar Boyd. He's the Justice Reform Organizer for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. And the third panelist will be Steve Discano, the Commonwealth Attorney of Fairfax County. He will be followed by Diane again, who will wrap up some of the information that she presents at the very beginning. Before we get going, I do want to say, just relay a very brief anecdote, something that happened about 3 weeks ago, and made it clear to me once again how important this topic is. I moved into an apartment to be close to my son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren. And while I was upstairs overseeing the placement of the furniture and the boxes and everything, one of the movers came upstairs in an absolute panic, very frightened, saying that a woman had accosted the three movers, yelled at them for parking the truck where they did. We did have permission, by the way, and told them she was going to call the police. Now, she knew nothing about these three men other than the fact that they were speaking Spanish to each other and were clearly Latinos. She knew nothing about their backgrounds, how a threat like that could be taken by someone who perhaps had faced really difficult circumstances with other law enforcement in the past. I was extremely angry, upset. I immediately went downstairs to confront the woman with my American accent. And of course she had left. So my son ended up standing there by the truck to make sure if she or anybody else came up to harass the movers, that he could take care of it with his American accent. My mother was an immigrant. I took this personally, and I have many years of advocacy experience at the federal and state level on social justice. And I'm in my 70s now, okay? And I am so tired that this continues to happen. We have to change the way we treat each other. That said, I will turn this over to Diane Alejandro, and she will talk about some of the issues around jail to deportation pipeline and so forth. Diane?
Thanks, Stephanie. I'm just going to spend a few minutes sort of laying the stage and then let our main speakers talk about what actions they are taking, and then circle back with a few advocates' perspective at the end. But to view this sort of in a holistic sense, we've made a lot of progress on some issues in ending voluntary cooperation with ICE, at least in some ways, and it's not complete, it's not universally true across Virginia, much less the country, but there are steps that have been taken that we can view as real progress to stopping the deportation pipeline. We now have a trust policy in Fairfax, which is a non-cooperation policy that states, requires all employees to not cooperate with ICE voluntarily, so not unless they're required to by law, and also limits information sharing. And we really have sort of three criteria that we use here. You don't ask if you don't absolutely need to know about immigration status, but also other personal information that ICE can use to track someone down. You do not access that information in the file unless you have a need to know, and you do not disclose it either to the public or to ICE. And the reason for both of those is because ICE is so adept at data mining. And they have now gotten to the point where they spend billions of dollars having LexisNexis and other folks get information that is either public or quasi-public. So that's a good thing, and we're seeing progress in other jurisdictions. Arlington is looking at enacting its own trust policy. Here in Fairfax, you will hear later about Steve Discano's policy. The school board is proposing one as well, and we're actually making a little headway with the sheriff. Fairfax is also adopting a new position, which hopefully will be filled by January, for a director of immigrant community affairs. So, you know, those are all things that we hope, and our model has been, our goal has been to use that as a model in the rest of Virginia. I think, as Simon mentioned yesterday, we have to wonder whether that's going to be possible in the new era. But on the other hand, right now, if it doesn't happen on the local level, it's probably not going to happen in Virginia, right? I mean, it's going to be very difficult with this governor and this attorney general to get positive action going forward. So that's why we look at these as important. And there have been state changes as well, the privacy protection that LAJC and People Power and Vasir worked on, that in the driver's privilege card is super important. But we're going to focus on how you keep people out of the criminal justice system. And the reason for that is if you don't get arrested or you don't have contact with the criminal justice system, your personal information is not entered into the shared criminal database that ICE can access to find you. We have situations here in Fairfax that we fought for ever, and finally have the police have removed a list of everyone arrested, and you'll find this in other places in Virginia, that they will list every person who's arrested, not convicted, just arrested. Their full name, their date of birth, and their address. You know, for someone looking to cross-reference a list of potential deportees, that's a gold mine. So we want that kind of information down. Your arrest records, if you don't have an arrest record, it can't be released under FOIA. And, you know, if you're not in jail, the sheriff can't turn you over to ICE. So obviously, I mean, it's somewhat stating the obvious, but especially in a time where it may be hard to get a lot of direct protections for immigrants, one of the best things we can do is keep folks out of the criminal justice system, reducing arrests or changing root causes that contribute to arrests. And our panelists here are gonna focus on those type of actions that can be taken. So let me turn it back to Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Diane. And as I mentioned at the outset, Diane will join us again near the end of the presentations to provide some very informative statistical information. Our next speaker, Reverend Jamar Boyd, as I mentioned, the Justice Reform Organizer for the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy, which is headquartered in Richmond. Thank you. Jamar?
Yes, thank you. Glad to be with you all today and look forward to sharing more deeply into the work that Virginia Interfaith Center has continued to do as it relates to solitary confinement, specifically in the upcoming General Assembly session for 2022. If you paid attention this year, we were a key part of the work to abolish the death penalty here in Virginia. And along with that, we are doing immigrant worker justice as well. And I think my coworker Sheila, I see that she's with us today in the space. But you know, workers' rights, workers' pay, and workers' justice is a critical part of what we believe are the rights of not just all citizens in Virginia, but especially those who are oppressed and the disenfranchised as immigrants in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so that is the readied work that we do at Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. What we also have noticed is churches are key incubators to ensuring that our brothers and sisters or neighbors are protected from entities within the government and beyond that would otherwise ostracize them from in having their full rights and to having a positive life here in the United States. I guess the last part of an introduction I would say is the beautiful thing about Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy is that while we have interfaith in the name, not all of our members share a faith specifically, but they do share in the belief of the common good of society and humanity. And so it enables us to engage a broad array of topics, but understand the necessity to advocate for all people, regardless of race, creed, gender, sexuality. And this is key as we see the shift in our politics in Virginia, the shift in our demographics in Virginia, and the reality that in 2040, the majority of the United States population demographic will be people of color. And so we're going to have some key conversations and key discussions on what it means for the United States of America and Virginia specifically to be a noted statistic of diversity in demographic shifts as we go forward.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Discano, the Commonwealth Attorney in Fairfax County. And we have not mentioned this specifically. We know that as a result of the election last week, there are going to be challenges ahead for all advocates. Any and all of the speakers can speak a little to that as they wish. With that, turn it over to you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for introducing me. I'm really, really glad to be here and really excited to speak to every one of you. I will tell you that I'm very, very proud that since in the 23 months that I've been in office, we've done a lot of positive on criminal justice reform here in Fairfax, the largest jurisdiction in Virginia. And it takes over a wide array of things, whether that was on marijuana or sentencing or bail reform, police accountability, and specifically the trust policy that I'm very, very proud of. I'm really proud of the non-cooperation agreement that my office created, because it's specific to our office, but we created it with community stakeholders. This is not something that we wrote just to have window dressing. We actively engaged with the community over a long period of time, to the point that we were doing red lines with Diane and some other members of our community, because we wanted to get this right, because it was so important that we got this right. And quite frankly, I'm looking forward to and hoping that this idea spreads out to other localities within the Commonwealth and other agencies, even within Fairfax. So I have to say, in Fairfax right now, having agencies that, particularly in law enforcement, that don't have a policy like this, I think it's shameful. I think that this is bare minimum of what we should be expecting from ourselves, who call ourselves allies. I will note that with all of that progress that we've made, and Stephanie, to the point that you just made, and Diane, I think you mentioned it when you were speaking, we live in a different world now. Or we're going to be entering a different world with the results of last Tuesday's election. What we're going to see is that there's going to be a lot of gridlock, I think, in the state. We got a lot of great things passed in the state over the last 2 years, but I think with Republicans taking over the House, that is going to, and the statewide offices, a lot of that's going to really slow down. That's why we really need to focus on work that we can do in localities, because I think in localities is where we have the opportunity, particularly in localities that did not vote for this statewide ticket that will be taking power in January. And one of the biggest, and that's why I think what's really interesting to note is that the statewide ticket, the day after they won, Attorney General-elect Jason Miyares came out and said that what he wants to do is he wants to take power away from the locally elected officials, wants to take power away from what he calls social justice Commonwealth's attorneys. Well, I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but yeah, I think Commonwealth's attorneys, I think people who do this work, we should be interested in justice. When he says social justice, he says it as an epithet. I take it as a badge of honor, and I think everybody else on this call takes it as a badge of honor as well. So, and just think about what could happen to all the hard work that everybody on this call has done in their locality if somebody like Jason Miyares comes in and can undo that. And that's what we got to really fight against. So I think there is a tendency to to play defense, but I think it's really important that we stay on offense. And I'm really excited to talk about that, talk about things that we can do, things that we're doing, and what the road ahead looks like with each and every one of you. So again, thank you for having me. I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions and engaging with each and every one of you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's particularly important. A lot of the media and a lot of the discussion of last week's elections have really focused on the governor. Well, there were other people who were elected too, are going to have a huge impact, including the Attorney General. I haven't seen any real coverage in the media of what that particular choice will mean for the state. That said, we'd like to return now to Diane, who will give you more information about the topics. As it says right here, she's sharing criminal justice reform, essential to protecting immigrants.
Thank you. And then I look forward to getting back to our other panelists and having discussions. From an advocate's perspective here, I absolutely agree with Steve that we don't need to be defensive. I mean, defense is gonna come into play for sure, but we do have a cause that is worth fighting for and continuing it in whatever manner we can. And that may change as the landscape changes, but continuing it is absolutely critical. And some of these changes have happened. You will note, a lot of changes in other jurisdictions in localities happened during the Trump administration. So we have a Biden administration, we have a Republican governor now, but there is power at the locality in the absence of laws that absolutely preclude that from happening. And in terms of how we do this, every group, I think, takes their own tact, and whatever really speaks to you, I think, is the truth that folks should be speaking. We like the idea of incorporating both lived experiences, data, because a lot of public officials are key on data. And putting public pressure, but also meeting one-on-one with your leaders. You can have discussions in private that you can't have in public, but you want to have the show of force too. And I'm going to spend a little time on the data side of this, because I think it's important to show on sort of a global, a societal level, there's disparity. We all know this is true in how people of color get treated by police. The key thing is the data backs that up. And, the police can come back and say, oh, but A, B, and C explains that. But the numbers are so striking. It's hard for them to really justify that. The other thing we like to use data for is to focus on specific offenses. There's a huge disparity, for example, if you look at the drunken public data, and I'll go through some of that. That shows the huge impact on the immigrant community. And we went through that with marijuana earlier. So we've seen that that's a huge disparity on people of color there. And these are changes that are on their face neutral. So if you are concerned about, the right-wing blowback, the good efforts of social justice that focus on helping on issues like behavioral health, drunkenness, drug addiction are at least more neutral. I mean, I'm sure, that you have candidates who can disparage even that effort, but let's face it, people suffering from alcoholism are suffering, and they are Black, white, brown, male, female, et cetera, et cetera. So those are one ideas of an area to focus on. This, I just want to focus on this because we have a real difficulty in getting our public officials to set out data in a way that is really meaningful for disparity analyses. And the disparity, of course, is a difference between how the person of a white person is arrested. In this case, we're looking at arrest versus a person of color. And there are all sorts of demographic reasons of saying race is different than ethnicity. And so you have to treat those separately. Increasingly, folks are recognizing, and we're finally making some headway with the Fairfax police, that you need to treat Latinos of all races as a separate category. And this chart shows you why. In their traditional analysis that Fairfax does, it shows that 57% of the population that's arrested are white. Well, it turns out that 28% of those, about half of them, are Latino, and they face discrimination that the average white person does not. And this skews what you find out about the disparity, not just for Latinos. I mean, that's somewhat obvious, but for Blacks as well, because how people measure disparity is by looking at the difference between white and say Black here. And it's almost twice as large a disparity if you break out the white non-Latino. So, you know, this is a bit in the weeds, but it really comes down to Latinos don't view themselves as the same as whites. The police don't view them the same, unfortunately. So let's go with the community perception and recognize that there are challenges that the Latino population faces that regular white folks do not. So, you know, we have tried to do that in our data from Fairfax. You now can do that in Virginia as well. But they're not going to make it easier for us to do that. The Virginia Criminal Data Portal Policing Act, the Virginia Community Policing Act data that's now online has very helpful information that breaks out race, ethnicity for all sorts of police actions. But the reason I say they don't make it easy for us is they follow the traditional, let me break it out by race and let me break it out by ethnicity. So again, coming up with a value of Latinos, how are Latinos treated? You got to do a lot of calculations. And, you know, if you're cynical, you might say this is on purpose, that they don't want you to find the data. But this is one area where we're hoping that we can get change to at least have the information be meaningful for you. We have analyzed Fairfax data. You know, it's clear for us that there is disparity. For Blacks, you're 7 times more likely than a white person to be arrested. Latinos, you're 3 times as likely. And this does not, there are some other breakdowns that you can do that may lower these numbers, but the fact remains the disparity is there at significant levels. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that becomes important, I think, if you're trying to focus on where do you want to put your attention, if you look at the numbers here that are in yellow, these are the offenses where the Latino population has a huge disparity in terms of the number of arrests. And they have something in common. They have to do with alcohol and driving under the influence, public drunkenness, liquor law violations. The last category, non-IBR, is really things like false IDs that come up, is probably the biggest driver there. But this doesn't mean that the Latino community has a bigger alcohol problem. I don't know that. It does mean they're arrested more. And it's really a problem when you look at the difference between how say a college student who's drunk is, just told to walk it off. Someone standing outside the 7-Eleven who is drunk, who is picked up to sleep it off in the drunk tank known as the Adult Detention Center in Fairfax, the jail, ends up being sent to ICE and deported. So that's a very expensive drunk. But You know, that is the kind of thing that there are states now who view this as a non-criminal offense. And, you know, one of the things, Steve, when we get back to that is, you know, I'd like him to address is what happens there. Finally, we don't have good data that we can share with you on Black immigrants in detention in the criminal justice system, but there is information from ICE detention. And it shouldn't surprise you that Black immigrants are at a greater risk for deportation than our other groups. We've seen this with the Haiti exclusions. It happens with those coming for asylum. And why is it that we're sending, you know, the Haitians back to Haiti to face, you know, horrendous conditions there? And yet you don't see the same result with other communities. So I would suspect that same thing, and maybe Jamar's experience on solitary confinement may be relevant here as well. In the ICE incarceration, you have 6 times greater chance of being in solitary confinement if you're Black than if you are, of another origin. I'm going to stop the share there and stop this so we can hopefully open it up to discussion. And I put the link to this in the chat so that if anybody wants to access it later, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I have been seeing some questions in the chat. Feel free to add your own or even say something out loud. I know in some of the panels previously that happened as well. The first question, I hope it's the first question I saw was from Miriam. And do we have community agreements on ensuring that we are not tolerating microaggressions? And that, I assume, referred to the story I told. And I'd like to pose that to you, Jamar. I think dealing with justice and particularly from a faith and justice perspective, what can we do about that?
Well, I think the question is absolutely necessary. I think the response to that is not an absolute, but it is contextual. I think in the spirit in which we engage at VICPP, we try to ensure that congregations and denominations do internal reflections first. There in turn, it will help define their mission and their narrative of the work that they're doing. And then it will influence the return or the commitment that they have to their broader community. So they're in turn, seemingly investigating your theologies, investigating how your theologies and your practices of those theologies impact your engagement with the broader community. For example, understanding the reality of gentrification, understanding the reality of redlining and redistricting, and how your silence or your apathy to that can actually encourage or further produce microaggressions that you see in your community. And I think, Stephanie, the story you shared rather is almost an underlying undercurrent of that. As you see white flight in certain areas or white movement into other areas that were known as high urban populations. So if you see folks moving into Richmond neighborhoods like Churchill in downtown Richmond, that are predominantly Black, that are predominantly Hispanic or predominantly immigrant neighborhoods, but you're unaware rather of the history of these neighborhoods. Your microaggressions have to be first internally investigated, internally confronted, and that requires you to actually understand where you're living, who you are engaging, and who your neighbors are, so that you can be a respectful citizen and a contributing citizen to that area.
Thank you, Jamar. The next question I saw, and there may be others again, I'm trying to go up and down the list here, was from Simon. And because, you know, of course, you'll, at some point in your life, you will no longer hold your office. What steps are you able to make to try to lock in some of the changes and reforms that you've helped institute or will institute, and structurally reduce the power of the criminal justice system over people's lives?
Well, I think that's a great question because, you know, as a baseline matter, that really is the mission here. One of the things that myself and my leadership team and everybody in my office really takes seriously is the idea that we are a mission-focused office, we're a values-driven office, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to a place that Simon describes. And knowing that one of the things that we joke about, maybe darkly, is that I should be able to get hit by a bus, and the work of the office should still be able to continue apace. So that's very, very important to me. It's very important to the leadership team. It actually is reflective of why we do things the way that we do. So I have a number of answers for you. The first thing is just being very engaged at the statewide level. We've been very, very successful over the last 2 years at this. As many of you may know, I helped found a group called Virginia Progressive Prosecutors for Justice. And we, myself and some of my more reform-minded Commonwealth attorneys, our goal was to push legislation and to advocate for legislation and bring a different lens to what good public safety really is. And we've been very, very successful in getting things accomplished. So, for example, I was very, very strong on the stops bill. Basically, stops of individuals in cars for no real reason, just to harass people. I think I might have been the only prosecutor to actually go and testify in favor of that bill. And what we've seen is that dramatically reduced the number of police interactions individuals have. So that is hugely positive. I think I was one of 5 Commonwealth attorneys to really push on getting rid of jury sentencing, which sounds like a very, very minute detail, but to any attorneys here, what that really is that was a huge power grab for prosecutors, and we fought to get that power away from prosecutors so they couldn't really leverage unfair power against defendants anymore. And then on other things that we've done, we've led the way. I think Jamar mentioned the death penalty work that he's done over the years. I know when I first took office, I had the opportunity to get a gentleman off of death row, and I did that. I personally reduced the Virginia's death row by 33%, and that showed the legislature that it could be done and the world wouldn't explode. And now that's enshrined in law. More internally into the office, we've done a couple of things. One is on culture change. I have dozens and dozens of attorneys in this office, and it's all about having them have the right attitude and the right mindset. Out of the dozens of attorneys that I have, I only have one attorney from the old office from when I took over. And I did that intentionally because those individuals, that old office, did not have the reform mindset. They did not see their role as stewards of the community. They did not have, in my opinion, they did not feel an obligation to the community to understand that justice and safety go together. So we've gotten people in the office that even long after I'm gone, the culture of this office will continue apace in that way. Another thing that we're doing in office is we are putting a lot of emphasis on collecting data, on doing it right. And then once we have data collected, giving it to the community. The reason that we're doing that is we recognize that the public speaks through this office, and we want to continue to message and tell and show people that what we're doing is working and how it can be effective and how justice actually leads to safety. And as a matter of fact, we have a data program that will go on in perpetuity, but we have contracts that are signed that will continue on even past the next election, because we want to enshrine this as the way this office does business. Another thing that I'm really proud of is we write down our policies and we make them publicly available. The reason for that is for political pressure. Because if we have publicly available written policies, this is why the trust policy was so important. And that's why, Diane, I know you would not have taken my word and said, Diane, I'm here, I'm going to do it. You can trust me. The reason it's important that it's written and that it's public is because there will be a political cost for anybody who tries to undo any of these things, whether it's me or somebody else. The fact is that what we have done is we've set up a poison pill that if anybody tries to roll back these reforms, they have to pay a price for it. And then the last thing that we're going to be doing is, it goes back to politics and paying a price. I talked earlier about how Attorney General elect Jason Miyares is going to try to get bills passed so that he can take over more power in localities, try to bring his view of criminal justice that was rejected by Fairfax County roundly. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we fight back robustly, because we're trying to inoculate our community to the idea that more draconian law enforcement, more length of sentences, those sorts of things lead to community safety. If we fight back on this and we inoculate our population to that wrong-headed idea, what will happen is there'll be even more of a groundswell of support to have these reforms continued, whether it's by me or somebody else. So we're doing all of those things with the idea that, look, I love this job, I love doing it, I think we're making great strides. But I know that this work has to outlive me. It has to be a legacy. It has to go on for this generation, the next generation, and generation, continuing on and on and on. So that's really what we're trying to do in this office to make sure it lives on beyond my terms.
Thank you. Another question, this one from, excuse me, Miriam. Is anyone addressing, this was in response, I assume, to Diane's presentation. Is anyone addressing how oppression perpetuates these demographics? And maybe you, Diane, and or you, Jamar, would like to address that question.
I'll just start and turn it over to Jamar. I think this is the key to focusing on root causes and what is really driving the contact with criminal justice and the criminal justice system. There are so many factors, and you know, it's easy to get bogged down. We have a one Fairfax policy that is looking at sort of the drivers of, you know, of oppression. They don't use that word, but that's essentially it. And they've identified a number of factors like poverty and so forth that really lead into this, and the whole white power structure. As to translating that into action is really, really hard. And I don't have any new brilliant ideas. I'm hoping Jamar can weigh in on here. It's one of those things that I think we have to keep plugging away at. But it's hard often to see the direct connection. And there's so many problems even with the direct connection of police action to the community that sometimes it's easier to focus on those. But you're right, that's sort of the underlying problem.
And so I think my initial response to this is to introduce this big terminology called adverse community experiences. Adverse community experiences are the underlying things that lead to manifested oppression or actualized oppression in our politics and our policies, such as poverty, education, economics, wealth distribution, the school to prison pipeline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these are considered to be adverse community experiences. And then when you couple them in with sitting with the reality that Virginia, as the nation's former capital of the Confederacy, and an honest conversation of what that still looks like in 2021, from how we look at police relations within communities, how we look at Virginia, and specifically the General Assembly's relationship with Congress. And it's most notably always joked about that whatever Virginia legislates and mandates as law, Congress will follow in some way, shape, or form, because it shapes the DMV and it then shapes the broader East Coast, and it kind of funnels itself out. And then the last thing that I would say on this is, if there's not an honest conversation, that oppression does not always manifest itself tangibly and visibly, but it most often is the blind bias that influences our practices. We're unable to really unpack its impact. So the most ready thing is, I think we brought up DUIs and DWIs, right? If the same crime is happening in white communities and you're seeing less than 1% of those persons arrested for the same crime, but Black and brown persons are being arrested at 10 and 20 and 30 times the rate, that's a clear indication that, number one, bias is the sole reason that they're being arrested. The second is either the police department's alliance to oppression and or its alliance to violence. And when we say violence, I think we most often think of somebody being murdered or killed, but violence is the targeting of immigrants, the targeting of Black and brown persons because they are different externally, that they possess another nationality or race. And that the reality is there has to be a questioning of, well, why are you targeting these communities? What is the relationship to your department to ICE? And what is your relationship to your department to the broader sector that would lead to the exiting of these individuals from the United States of America? So oppression cannot be a single-handed or singly engaged aspect of our society, but it is multifaceted and it's in every aspect of our society. So when you have people like Steve who are willing to join us today and share what his office is doing, they're kind of peeling back and unpacking the layers of oppression that are in the Commonwealth, specifically in our criminal justice system. And what does it look like when you have a new attorney general specifically earmarking and highlighting quote unquote social justice attorneys? If that's not what they're supposed to be, then that means oppression is, the end of the day, what the new administration is going to be going after. And that's a hard pill to swallow, and a reality we may have to sit with as we engage this next 3 to 4 years.
Thank you, Diane and Jamar. We also had a question that relates to what Jamar just mentioned, but it asked for how we can address it. The address was from Ninfa Amador Hernandez. DUI and DWIs play a significant role in the deportation of our community members, especially males. What work is being done to change how these are categorized? And I'd like to ask Steve if you might want to address, is there anything being done to correct these disparities?
Well, it's a great question, because I think it really hits on something that I think probably everybody in this call really has a problem with, which is when you add on the immigration consequences to a penalty or to an offense, it really does show a disparity, right? If I'm an individual who is doing something, and my penalty includes a fine. But if I'm someone who doesn't have status, and if my penalty includes that fine, but also a deportation and ripping me away from my family and breaking up a family structure, that is incredibly problematic. And right now we live in a legal system where too often that's exactly the case. In many ways, the federal guidelines in terms of what counts as a quote unquote crime of moral turpitude that would make someone deportable is vast. For example, marijuana offenses, some marijuana offenses are on that list. That's one of the reasons why when I took office, I stopped prosecuting marijuana offenses. That, along with and I think Jamar hit on this, is, when you have African Americans who were 7 times more likely to be arrested and prosecuted for those things, right? There are problems here. As far as DUIs and DWIs, as far as the categorization, those are if I'm understanding the question correctly, those are federal categorizations in terms of whether or not a crime would make that deportable. So as far as the work on whether or not a certain offense rises to a moral turpitude or what have you for deportation, I believe that work would be at the federal level.
Thank you.
Let me just weigh in on that if I can. I think that you're right, Steve, for the deportation aspect of it, that's a federal issue, but I think that part of the concern at the local level is the disparity in who gets arrested and who gets prosecuted for those same offenses. And it's one of those things that to take it in its simplest form, the drunk in public, because you don't get the person behind the wheel. We had 9 out of the 10 current Board of Supervisors members sign on to the idea that they essentially wanted to decriminalize drunk in public, because you don't have to, under state law, take that person to jail. You can take them to a detox facility. And everybody thought that was a great idea. How many, that was a couple of years ago, nothing's been done. Primarily, I think, because that would take money as a solution. So that's part of the problem, but the other problem is the who gets picked up to start off with. And that's something I think we have to deal with at the local level.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jamar. I will say that sadly we need to wrap this up because at least one of our panelists and our interpreters have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. But we still have maybe 1 or 2 minutes if the 3 of you would like to each say one very brief wrap-up statement. Steve, can we start with you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me. I think the message that I'd want to leave everybody with is, look, the world has changed in Virginia. There is a lot of people who are trying to undo the progress that we've done, but we have to remember that we're fighting on the side of right here. Our cause is just. And at the local, at the state, at the federal level, there are opportunities and levers for us to pull. So I would ask everybody to not give up heart, to always look for levers to pull, buttons to push, because at the end of the day, it's almost like we're moving incrementally, and as long as we continue to move in that right direction, we're going to be successful. It's when we get down in the dumps and stop and say, oh, how can Virginia elect these guys to attorney general, governor, and this and that is where we fall into it. So let's stay on offense and let's keep doing what's right here.
Thank you. Jamar?
Yes, thank you all again for allowing me to share today and to be in the space, to share space with you, Stephanie, Diane, and Steve. The last thing I would say is remember, communal collective power makes the difference at the end of the day. That's after voting, after sitting in sessions and all of that, is your communal collective power that at the end of the day can turn the tide of democracy for a positive change.
Thank you. And finally, Diane.
Thank you, Stephanie, Steve, and Jamar. I've really enjoyed talking to you all and hearing your views on these important issues. I think you all have wrapped it up very eloquently. So the only thing I would add is if you're, pick a topic you can keep working on. There's so many. And it could be voting rights, and that's going to help. It could be the drunken public, whatever it is. There is work that can still be done, even with the Republican governor and attorney general. So I hope everyone continues. Thanks.
On that hopeful note, thank you all, and we'll turn it back.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you so much to all of the panelists, not just for this great panel, but for the whole event, because that is our last panel for the events. I want to give a real big thank you to VACOLAO and all of the co-sponsors of the event for putting this together. It is the 12th time it has happened, and it is the second time it has happened throughout the pandemic. So I think it's big kudos for the big lift here in bringing so many people together despite the circumstances and to have such great conversation. I also want to give a big thank you to the interpreters who are having to hop off right now. Their names are Felix Cardon and Aldo Resendiz. I will be putting their emails in the chat. And I will actually be continuing in consecutive interpreting from here on, including for Maria's event. De ahora en adelante voy a seguir consecutivamente, ya que los intérpretes tienen que irse. Y quería poner en el chat los emails de los intérpretes por si alguien quiere contratarlos para un evento. Again, I'm putting the emails of the interpreters in the chat if anybody wants to hire them for future events. Yo creo que fueron estupendos. I think they were amazing. Y con eso se lo paso a María Chavalán Sud. María Chavalán está buscando asilo aquí en los Estados Unidos y tomó santuario en la iglesia metodista de Wesley Memorial en Charlottesville, Virginia. María se huyó de su país de origen en Guatemala para evitar persecución a base de su orgullosa identidad como Maya Cachiquel, y ha estado en este país buscando refugio. Maria Chavalán Sud is an asylum seeker here in the US. Maria took sanctuary at the Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church. Maria fled her home country, Guatemala, to avoid persecution, and she came to this to avoid persecution due to her identity as a proud Maya Cachiquel. She came to this country seeking refuge to save her life. María, te lo paso a ti para cerrar nuestro evento. Lo único que pido es que vayas como de frase a frase para yo poder interpretar, ¿ok? María, you will now close the event. The only thing I ask is that you go in short phrases so that I can catch up with interpreting.
Muy bien. Pues buen día a todos. Mi nombre es María Chavalán Sud. Soy Maya Cachiquel. Soy nativa de este continente.
Good day to everybody. My name is Maria Chavalán Sud. I am Maya Cachiquel. I am indigenous to this continent.
De estar en esta reunión escuchando de los temas que trataron, detención, policía y todo eso.
It was a pleasure being in this meeting, listening to all of the topics, you know, detention and police, all of that.
Quisiera hablar de un poquito de la experiencia que yo viví y lo que viven las personas en la frontera con Estados Unidos.
I would like to talk a little bit about my experience, what I went through in the border and the people who are there.
Del mes que estuve detenida en el centro de detención Puerto Isabel.
And the month that I was detained in the Puerto Isabel detention center.
El Civil Patrol tira a los perros grandes para que boten las personas y así los atrapan.
The Border Patrol will unleash dogs on people so that they chase people, and that's how they capture us.
La gente llega a la detención herido, golpeado y traumado.
People will be brought into detention wounded, bruised, and abused.
Ojalá que en ese tiempo, eso fue a finales del 2016, pues igual separaban las madres con sus hijos.
That was at the end of 2016, and at that time they were separating mothers from their children.
Y espero en Dios que esas madres ahora puedan estar con sus niños.
And I pray to God that now those mothers are able to be with their children.
Y, yo sigo aquí en la iglesia metodista viviendo debido a que tengo miedo del ICE.
And I'm still continuing to live here at the Methodist Church due to the fact that I'm afraid of ICE.
He estado navegando con las leyes, buscando una justicia justa,
I've been navigating the laws looking for justice,
pero el sistema está muy roto
but the system is too broken.
y espero una justicia de humanidad para mí y para todas las líderes en Iglesia Santuario.
And I'm looking for humane justice for me and for all the leaders who are in sanctuary.
Hemos padecido enfermedades por estar encerrada 3, 4 años en las iglesias.
We have gone through illness from having to be inside the church for 3, 4 years, locked away.
Y tenemos daños en los nervios de los pies por el grillete que traíamos al estar bajo supervisión intensiva de ISAP.
And we have suffered nerve damage on our feet and our ankles due to the ankle monitors they put on us while we are under supervision by ISAP.
Y son traumas también que no hemos superado.
And these are traumas that we have not been able to overcome.
Mis compañeras y yo, pues perdimos nuestros dientes. 4 o 5 muelas, cada uno hemos perdido por esos traumas.
We have even lost teeth because of those traumas, some of us. Yeah.
Y hay algunas que también les dio diabetes por eso.
And some of us even got diabetes because of that trauma.
Y espero que ustedes puedan hablar por nosotros y por todas las personas que no contamos con documentos.
And I hope that all of you can speak for us and for all of the people who don't have documents.
Porque yo soy nativa de este continente. Cuando me dicen inmigrante, yo no vine del mar y no vine caminado por Cristóbal Colón.
Because, you know, because I am native to this continent, so when they call me an immigrant, I did not come overseas, and I was not bribed by Christopher Columbus' boat.
Y lo que quiero yo en estas tierras es que haya justicia y humanidad para las personas.
And what I want in this land is for there to be justice and humane treatment for all people.
Así que aprueben la ciudadanía para todas las personas que no tienen documento.
So I ask for citizenship for all, for those who don't have documents.
Y seguiremos luchando por la justicia para la humanidad y todos los seres de este planeta.
And we will keep fighting for justice for all of humanity and all of the beings of this planet.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, everyone. Muchas gracias, María. Verdaderamente es un honor tenerte en este espacio. Thank you so much, Maria. Truly, it is an honor to have you in this space. Thank you to everybody for joining us. That concludes the summit. Edgar, I don't know if there's anything else to share. Gracias a todos y todas por unirse a este cumbre. Eso concluye el evento. Edgar, no sé si hay algo más para compartir.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Luis, for the outstanding MC of today. And thank you to everybody. The 13th summit will be next year. Thank you.
Edgar dice muchas gracias a todos y todas. Esto concluye el cumbre y nos veremos el año que viene. Gracias.
Thank you.